All right. So we're starting with chapter 1, and chapter 1 is quadratics. So we're going to go over some basics of quadratics. And then today's section is actually 1A, is solving quadratics. So we're going to go over a little bit of solving quadratics as well. Write your stat box up there. Get a little stat box. We should have time to get to that. There will be some slides that I don't think you necessarily have to write down everything, so I will let you know. Some of it's just up here for me to talk through it. And let's see, that's the stat box. All right, so when we talk about quadratics, we talk about quadratic equations. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Keep in mind that x squared is what makes it a quadratic. And then quadratic functions, usually it's a y equals, and that's when you graph it. It usually looks like that. So we'll talk about graphing on a future section as well. All right, this is one you don't need to write down, okay? So, different kinds of polynomial functions you've worked with. The linear equation, probably one of your favorites. We've got those linear equations, we worked with that. We're going to be focusing on those quadratic equations, just like we talked about, or quadratic functions. Did you guys work with cubic functions last year?
A couple times.
I think so. And quartic as well? A little bit to the fourth power. So, we're going to be focusing right here on quadratics, okay? So that's just kind of an overview of different functions. You will see some linear functions along with the quadratic, but we should feel good about both of those. And let me see here. This you don't necessarily have to write down, but you can if you want to. Basically, this is what we're all going to go over. So solving quadratic functions, we've got 4 main ways. One of them is to factorize the quadratic and use the null factor law. Now, you might have never heard it being called the null factor law, but you've done it before. Do you remember when you factor it and you put both equal to 0 and you solve both?
Yeah.
That's the null factor law. So we're going to be doing that today. We are also going to complete the square today. Both of these methods of solving today. Anyone have any rememberings about completing the square? I had some people want to act like they never completed the square before, which is false. I just talked to your trig teachers. I know you did complete the square. There's we're going to kick it up a notch. I'm going to give you one type that you might not have seen before, but I know you've completed the square. Who remembers quadratic formula? Yeah, is that a fave? Anyone, is that your favorite? We're going to go over that tomorrow, and in fact, tomorrow I'm also going to give you a gift of a formula packet that has the quadratic formula in it, so you don't even have to memorize it. And when I give you that packet, you can use that packet on everything. You can use it on quizzes, you can use it on tests. It's the same packet you would use on the IB test. So we're going to do that tomorrow. Working with technology and graphing will be a little bit more like next week. So we'll work with some of that stuff then as well. So that first section, section A, is actually these 3 things: factoring, completing the square, and quadratic formula. All right, now let me see here. All right, again, I don't think you need to write this one down, so we'll just talk about this one. Just remember, did you guys ever hear the word roots for solutions? Like find the roots, find the solution? So that's really all this says, is a reminder that the roots or solutions of the quadratic equation are the values of x which satisfy the equation or make it true. So if we scoot this up, just an example, we've got this quadratic. If 1 is one of the solutions, when we plug that in, it still equals 0, so equals out. Do you guys remember checking your answers way back when? That's just kind of showing how that works. Now this one you might want to write down. Let me zoom that in a little bit. So the first thing we're going to do is solving by factoring. We're going to follow these steps. And you've done this before. You did this in Algebra 1. I know you did it in geometry a little bit. Did it last year. So, old news. Step 1, if necessary, rearrange the equation so that one side is 0. We don't want to start factoring until we've got all of our stuff on one side and the other side is 0. Step 2 is fully factorize the other side. Now, we know that step 2 is really actually got multiple steps. We spent some time factoring last week. Step 2, you have to look for greatest common factor. You have to look for perfect squares. You have to decide if you can do some quick factoring or if you have to do it the long way. So we know that step 2 is actually a little bit more involved. Now, if you need help with factoring, you can always go back to your H notes, because that's where we took our notes on how to factor back in section H. So keep that in mind. Once you factor it, you want to use the null factor law, like we were just talking about. So if your two factors equal 0, you can split that up. And then after that, you solve the linear equation. I'm not really sure why it's weird colored. So stuff in red is just the null factor law. This was like our first, because these are Miss Karen's and I were first starting, so they're not as good as like the end ones. But it'll be okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a couple of different examples. I'm going to show you some funky stuff and we'll work through that. And then we'll move to complete the square. Alright, so we are going to solve by factorization here. So our first example is 3x squared equals 8x. So step 1, we want to make sure it equals 0. So we've got to rearrange some stuff. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to minus my 8x over. Now we know those don't go together because they're not like terms. So I have 3x squared minus 8x equals 0. Step 1. Step 2 will be to fully factorize. So now this is where you have to kind of go through all of those steps that go along with factoring. So first, check for a greatest common factor. Do we have any greatest common factors? X. Look at that, x squared and x. You can take out an x. So when I take that out, then I have 3x minus 8. It's a good idea to just kind of check to make sure you're fully factorized. So if I look at this 3x minus 8, there's no more common factors. These are not perfect squares. So that's really all I can do. So this one, the factoring stuff was really pretty easy. Step 3 is null factor law. So you split them up. So I have x equals 0 and 3x minus 8 equals 0. The last step is to solve. So the x minus 0 side is pretty much solved. Over here I'll have to add 8, so 3x equals 8, and x equals 8/3. It does not say you have to solve exactly, so if you want to get a decimal or round, you can. I'm just going to leave mine like that. Any questions so far? So I'm going to throw some funky ones at you now. Okay. So this next example is 2x minus 1 over x equals -1. This isn't even a quadratic. There's no x squared. Any ideas? Any wild guesses? Wow. Was there one? No. I don't love this right here with the x in the denominator. Would you guys agree? That's it. What we can do to get rid of this x so that we don't have like a fraction in here is we can multiply by x. If I multiply by x, it'll get rid of that. So I'm going to take this whole thing and multiply by x. And just like a side note, one of the like little mistakes, like I mentioned earlier on the test, was people not distributing things all the way. So make sure that you distribute it to all the parts here. So I'll have 2x squared minus 1, because those x's will cancel out. And then you got to distribute down here too, so equals negative 1x. Now that we've got this, it's looking a little bit more like a quadratic, right? I got an x squared, I got an x, I got a number. So we want to make it equal to 0. So I'm going to bring this 1x over. I'm going to put it right in the middle so it's in descending order. So I have 2x squared plus 1x minus 1 equals 0. So step 1 was a little bit longer because I had to do some finagling here to get a quadratic, but now it's equal to 0. Step 2 is factor. Do I have any greatest common factors throughout the whole thing? Do I have perfect squares on the ends? Do I have a 1 up front? Whoa, so I have to do that long factoring. So I have to do 2 minus negative 1. Notice we're not doing anything with the 0. Like the 0 is on the other side. We're just working on the left side of the equal sign. So if I do 2 times negative 1, put that over here, I've got negative 2. So I need factors of negative 2 that combine to give me 1. Yeah, 2 and negative 1. Remember, it does not matter the order that you put them in the middle. I'm going to do them in a certain order so I can point something out to you. So I'm going to do minus 1x plus 2x. So it does not matter, but I'm going to point something out in a second here. So now we get to group it. So if I look at these first two, the only thing they really have in common is an x. So when I take an x out, I've got 2x minus 1. And this was another common mistake. Like, it's a little mistake that I saw show up on several people's tests, is jumping right to this and kind of missing something in here. Remember that whatever sign you have here, you've got to put here. And you need something in here. You can't just leave that blank. So what's the only thing that comes out of both of those? 1. So I just, like I said, I noticed a handful of people kind of missing that step, so I thought I'd point it out right here. So then I have x plus 1 and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So that factoring took a little bit longer too. After this, now I'm going to have to move up here, but after this we use the null factor law, so x plus 1 equals 0 and 2x minus 1 equals 0. So when I solve, I end up with x equals negative 1 or x equals 1/2. I kind of did that one kind of quick, so if you need help with that, let me know. We're going to do one more funky one before we get to complete the square. So are there any questions so far? Okay. So our last one is x over x plus 9 equals 2 over x minus 1. This is not those adding ones we were doing. This is equals, right? In section J, we were adding and subtracting. That was something different. Where did that come from? Yeah! Yeah, we can cross multiply this. When you've got two fractions that are equal, cross multiplying is a great option. So I'm going to multiply these. I'm not going to skip any steps here so you guys can see it all. And then multiply these ones. So then we can distribute. Now that's looking like a quadratic because I've got x squared, I've got some x's, I've got a number. So I'm going to bring everything over. So I've got a minus the 2x and minus the 18. So I've got x squared minus 3x minus 18 equals 0.
What is, like, I moved a different part.
That should be fine. Yeah.
It looks different.
So let's keep going and see what happens. Do you have it in descending order where it's like squared? Okay. You should still be fine. This next step might be a little different or harder for you. So now I'm on step 2, which is factoring. And so I don't have any greatest common factor. I don't have any perfect squares, so it's not that special kind. I only have a 1 here, though. That's good news. If you remember, if you only have a 1 here, you can do the quick factoring where you think of factors of negative 18 that combine to get negative 3. All right, negative 6 and positive 3. So because there's a 1 right there, then we can do the quick factoring and just have x minus 6 and x plus 3. So like you might have to like take out a negative, do the negative x
Yeah,
squared.
I just took that.
But it would still work though. So
Yeah.
you like take out the negative 1. And,
Oh. Wait, wouldn't you have to have the signs in the middle again? Like when you have something in the middle between the two parentheses, like you said in the last example.
so that was when we were group factoring. That would be like, don't get confused and start writing this down. But let's say I did this instead. I did x squared minus 2x minus 18, and I wanted to put it in the middle here. If you're doing it this way, and this will still work. So like if you don't remember how to do the quick way, you can still go back and do it this way too. Okay? I mean, it's nice. It will go quicker for you if you remember the quick way, but if you don't, go ahead, break it up. You're going to get the same answer that we get here. So now we have to do the null factor last. So I'm going to have to bring that back up here as well. So I've got x minus 6 equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. And when I solve, x equals 6 or x equals negative 3. All right. So that is solving by factorization. Are there any questions? Okay. So coming up next is completing the square, and completing the square, usually people love it or they hate it. Now we all know that not everything can be factored, right? So we need some other options. There is quadratic formula. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Completing the square, I know that that's something that with my math degree I had to use in college. But the other reason to learn it is when we get to graphing. So we're going to learn it now, how to do it and solve it, and then it will actually help us out when we get to graphing. Now, every teacher is a little bit different, so I don't know if this is going to look exactly the way that you've seen it before. So let's take a look at this, and then we're going to go over 3 examples. So when we complete the square, what we're trying to do is we want something that looks like this. Something like, I don't know, x plus, I'm trying to think of what I want, x plus 6 squared. We want something like this. So what we have to do is we've got to make a trinomial that we can factor like this. Like if I had, let's see it, x squared plus 12x plus 36, this can factor down into this, like we've done that before. But the whole point with complete the square is we get to pick this number out ourselves. Or we have to pick it out ourselves. So to pick out this number, we call that number C. And what we have to do, and I think that this will hopefully start coming back when we actually do it with actual numbers, so don't start panicking, we will all get there. What we have to do is take a look at B, the number that's on the x term, we divide it by 2 and we square it. We take that number and we add it to both sides because we've got to keep everything equal. I can't just add it on one side because then I'm not balanced, right? So what happens then is this part can factor and look like this. Again, don't panic, we're going to get there. And then we can do some solving. So we're going to kind of do sort of 3-tiered examples here. The first example is going to be when it already looks cute, and I'll show you how to solve it. The second example will be how to do this. So this is not going to show up to the second example. And then the third example is going to be like the hard one. Everyone will get through this. Are we ready for the examples? I don't want to rush you. I think we're still writing. All right, so the second thing about this is our directions are going to be, I don't want that black right now. Solve exactly for x. So the deal with exactly is that means no approximate answer. So I don't want you to take the square root of 7 and give me a decimal. Don't approximate, you gotta leave it like the square root. So once again, we're gonna start with one that's already set up. So x minus 4 squared equals 8. So here's where the complete the square, and like some people love it because I think of these steps. I gotta get x by itself. How do I get rid of square root? I said it. How do you get rid of a square? You square root. So I square root both sides. So that gets rid of my parentheses. So I end up with x minus 4 on the left equals plus and minus the square root of 8. Yes, we can break down 8. We will do that. We're just not going to worry about that this second. Is everyone with me so far with the square rooting both sides? We got the plus and minus. We have one step now to get x by itself. How do I get x by itself? Add 4. So x equals 4 plus and minus the square root of 8. Besides the fact that we are going to simplify the square root of 8, this is done. See, it's coming back slowly but surely. And again, it's not usually a lot of people's favorites, but there's a point, and that point is factoring, and we'll get there eventually. So this is solved exactly because I don't want that decimal answer for square root of 8. So, does anyone remember how to take that square root of 8 and change it? What do you got, Alex?
Take out a 4. Right?
Yeah.
So, because then you would take out a 2 actually, and then there'd be a 2 left.
Yeah.
Isn't that how it is?
So x equals 4 plus 2 squared root of 2 is our best answer. Now I'm not going to go over how to, not going to go over that again because we went over that at the beginning of our first section. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take one and we're going to make it look like this, and then we're going to finish it. Oh, where am I here? Okay. X squared plus 6x plus 2 equals 0.
So is this example 2?
It is example 2. Thank you for it. Well, I guess it's 2 or 5. I accidentally started over with complete the square, so let's just go with 2. It's the second complete the square example. So this is not factorable. So even if you are like, you love factoring, you can't factor this. It won't work. So So what we are going to do is we are going to get it ready for complete the square. So the thing is, for completing the square, we need like a blank on both sides, and we gotta get rid of this 2 because I need a different number here. So I'm gonna subtract 2 from both sides, not in green because that's not showing up. Now when I do that, I'm gonna leave a blank for myself on both sides. Now I know that different teachers teach differently. I'm trying to make it as basic and easy for you to kind of follow as possible. So you might have, like I said, done it differently, but these blanks on both sides kind of help keep everything in place. So now I have to come up with that number to put there that's going to make it so I end up with something like this on this side. So to come up with that, that's when we have to find C by taking B, right here, this B, divided by 2. So 6 divided by 2 and squaring it. So that's 3 squared, which is 9. So I just kind of do that off to the side. So 9 is the number that I have to put on both sides.
So like you can just pull it out of your butt and be okay with it?
What? Did I pull it out of my butt though?
No, but you kind of did.
Where did I take it from?
You just gotta,
No, I didn't.
I don't know where you got it from.
I took it. I took this number.
Oh, okay.
It's got to be that number.
The middle of it.
Yes.
The 1x.
Yes, the number with 1x, the b, right? So it's ax squared plus bx plus c.
So is this the only way you would use this is if it's factorable? Or is there will it be specified in our homework and stuff?
Why is there 9 there?
Wait, say that again.
Okay, because you know how you have like
I
there's a
get
certain
that.
like the to use that is that the like is there only a certain like way that we use it? Meaning like a certain time that we use it?
Good question. So the times that you will use it will be on your assignment.
Okay,
On the quiz you'll probably have.
probably.
And when we do graphic stuff.
Okay.
Otherwise, if you don't like it, I wouldn't use it. I'm being honest. I would just put, if like after tomorrow, after you finish your assignment, if you're like, I don't really like this, then do quadratic formula. Because why not? You know what I mean? Like, I know we've talked about it, like knowing yourself and knowing what works for you. That will be the case. But you do need to practice this on your assignment.
Got it.
Okay? So we got the 6. You have to take that middle number, divide it by 2, and square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 3 squared is 9. That's what I have to put on both sides. Now, the right side is no big deal because negative 2 plus 9 is 7. That shouldn't freak you out. Now, this side, you could factor it, but the quick way to do it, this is going to match that. But what goes in here is that 6 divided by 2, or the b divided by 2 part. So that's going to be 3.
It's always.
Always. Always. Always. And that's, I mean, I put these on that first slide with the letters, right? You saw in here I had b divided by 2 on that first slide. Yeah, I'm not trying to make it tricky. I'm trying to make it as clear as I possibly can. Now that we got this far, remember this is where example 1 started? So we square root both sides. So I end up with x plus 3 equals plus or minus 7. And square root of 7. There we go. And I can't even break that down, so I don't even have to worry about trying to simplify that. How do I bring my 3 over? Go ahead. So x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 7, and I'm done. So I know that you guys did this last year. It'll come back to you eventually. We'll kind of work with it within graphing. Otherwise, you can choose to use other methods to solve. I do have to show you one more thing, and I know you did not see this last year because I asked Miss Milder.
What about Mr. Nathan?
I doubt it, but maybe. I mean, maybe. Okay, so this is the ugliest one. Just please be patient. We will get through it. 2x squared minus 10x plus 3 equals 0. Yeah, I know.
Oh.
Because you can't have a 2 in front. You can't have a 2 in front.
I like it.
Yeah, we have to divide everything by 2. I know it's practically.
Can we put domain error? Because you can't divide.
We're just gonna divide these by 2. You could divide 0 by 2, that's going to be 0. So I end up with x squared minus 5x plus 3 over 2 equals 0.
Could we make that decimal, or does it have to stay like that? Because I don't like
You gotta do exact answer, so I would not do decimal. Because it says the exact answer.
I hate fractions.
Alright, just stick with me here. We have to bring that over and get our blank. So we're gonna have x squared minus 5x plus blank equals negative 3 over 2 plus blank. Now remember what goes in here. We have to take b. Now we're not going to use the one with the 2 in front. We can't do it with the 2 in front. So we have to take b right here, divide it by 2, and square it. But I don't want to use that decimal, so I really just have to square it. So 5 squared is 25, and 2 squared is 4. So that has to go on both sides. Take deep breaths. There are just 2 of these problems on your assignment, okay? You will get through it. You will get through it. So here's our b, because we can't use this 10 because of that 2. So we divide it by 2 and square it. Okay. Alright. So, yep, add this on your calculator, so that's 19/4. Now over here, don't try and freak out. Remember that divided by 2 is what goes in here, so it's actually x minus 5 over 2. Remember you put the b divided by 2 in your parentheses? I just put it in my parentheses. So now I square root both sides. So I've got x minus 5 over 2 equals plus or minus square root of 19 over 4. I know I can simplify that, I'm just not to it yet. How do I bring my 5 over 2 over? Add it. So I'm going to have to come up here. So x equals 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 19/4. Well, technically, what's the square root of 4?
2.
So x equals 5 over 2 plus or minus the square root of 19 over 2. Yes, you could combine those into one fraction if you want to. They have the same denominator. Now, again, there are 2 problems like this. They're the very last 2 problems. You'll be okay.
Do you not want us to combine?
I don't care.
Does that mean there?
I don't know. Look in the back. Let it answer that question for you.
What back? This back?
Yeah, the back left. Okay. So very quickly we're gonna do a stop box. I forgot that I had a little something for you guys over here. Okay, so what is important to remember when completing the square? The b part over 2. Gotta remember that. Anything else? I think that's definitely, it's nice to remember that the b over 2 also goes in those parentheses. So I almost always put a little assignment guide in the back of your calendars, and I just didn't this time. I don't know why. So I made you a small one to help you keep track. From now on, I will hopefully recall or remember to put them on the back of your calendars. But it's just a little thing to help you keep track of your assignments. You don't have to use it. It's not like it's a requirement. It just kind of helps. All right. So that probably looks really weird, huh?
Yeah.
No. Okay. So there is an assignment for 1A.1.
So are those just like the sub-letters for each question?
Yes, there is. So like if you turn to page 21, you'll find A1. Question 1 says solve the following by factorization. And then there's all these little problems. So you don't have to do all of them. You just have to do 1A, 1F, 1G, 1I, and 1K. And then number 2 is like a different group of problems. But again, you don't have to do all of them. You just have to do 3. 2A, 2C, 2E. 3, again, is a different set. So you just have to do those 3.
Wait, what page?
21.
21. But I mean, it's pretty clear. It says exercise 1A1.
So are you ever gonna give us?
Nope. So then A2 actually happens on the next page, and so it says, you know, solve exactly for x for number 1. So like, this is actually just like complete the square example 1. This number 2 is like complete the square example 2. And like I said, just 2 problems to try for that last example. Does that make sense so far? How to like know what problems to do?
So it's just one assignment.
Yes. Yep.
It's
And they're
due-
both
If-
gonna go through Friday then.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. So today's Wednesday, so they're due on Friday.
So I put
Now, if we'll have this eventually, like if I want you to do all the problems, I don't write all the letters, I just write like 4. You have to do all of that. But we don't have any of that right now. Let's hope that this recorded, or I might cry a little.